I'm Jim Acosta. I host the Jim Acosta Show on Substack, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, all these other places, wherever you watch it. Thank you if you tune in or listen to it. Thanks for tuning in. Something crazy happened to me. The University of Virginia made some kind of a mistake and made me a visiting scholar, which I had to. So I joked to Larry, I'm now a gentleman and a scholar, which maybe just scholar. But it's been a big honor for me. I'm a Virginia guy. I was born in Fairfax County, grew up in Northern Virginia, went to another school in Virginia. We won't get into that. And then I, somewhere along the way, met up with this guy, Michael Fanone, former DC police officer with the Metropolitan Police Department. And it says Michael everywhere. I call him Mike, so a lot of his friends call him Mike. So if you hear that, don't think it's weird. And Mike is also a DC area native, born in DC, grew up in Virginia. And so it always feels good to talk to folks who are from the Commonwealth and talk about a lot of the stuff that's on our minds. So that's what we'll do tonight. I'm going to kind of run through Mike's background, what he's been through, kind of how that applies to where we are as a country right now, because I think it's pretty damn important. And then we'll get into some questions, and then we'll hear from some of you. And I want to tell you that we might break a little news tonight as to something that's been happening right here at the University of Virginia. So you'll want to stay tuned for that. So if you guys are tuning in right now, we're streaming live, hopefully on my channels and on Mike's channels and the UVA Center for Politics channel. And we definitely want to thank the Center for Politics for hosting us here. The great Larry Sabato can't be here tonight because he's paying attention to this very important, I guess, local election that they're having here in the Commonwealth. You may have heard about this. If you at one point you hear me say, "I am speaking," don't think there's anything wrong. I don't know if you've seen the ads for those of you just slow to the joke. I am speaking, but anyway. So Larry's monitoring. I think there's a debate in the Attorney General's race tonight. So he's doing that. He's always working. Larry's always working. But let's get started, okay? All right, let's do it. All right. Mike, good to see you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you guys for having me, hosting me. I can't tell you, honestly, how much I appreciate my relationship with Jim, just because, I mean, in this Trump 2.0 era, people like me cannot get a platform on legacy media. I did a brief stint as I'm sure many of you know, with CNN. That's how Jim and I originally met. Please don't hold me responsible for that. I've done worse things for money in my life. But yeah, no, I mean, it's troubling times. We're seeing, an event that's tremendously personal to me, the whitewashing of January 6th and everything that happened that day with presidential pardons. And now, a complete rewriting of the narrative in which I am one of the villains, and the individuals that assaulted me are the patriots and the heroes of the story.
Yeah. Well, we're not going to let that happen here tonight. That's for damn sure. And Mike, just to get us started, just to jump right into it, I mean, tell us about your background. I mentioned born in DC, grew up in Virginia. How'd you get into law enforcement? How'd you become a cop?
Yeah, so I was born in Washington, D.C., grew up in Alexandria, Virginia. Let's see. So I was I guess like a relatively lackluster student. I ended up dropping out of high school, going into the trades. I went to the trade school with the United Brotherhood of Carpenters and Joiners in Silver Spring, Maryland, and became an apprentice carpenter and then a journeyman carpenter. And then 9/11 happened. And I think like many of my colleagues, that was a pivotal moment in our lives in which we felt, a call to do something. And so I joined the police department. I put an application in with the United States Capitol Police at the time, and also the Metropolitan Police Department in Washington, D.C. U.S. Capitol Police called first. I think, September 29th, I was on my way to Glencoe, Georgia, to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. And, 8 months later, I was a U.S. Capitol Police officer. I stayed there for almost exactly a year. I think September 29th, 2002, I quit. And the following Monday, it was like a Friday, the following Monday, I started with the academy with the Metropolitan Police Department in Washington, D.C. Not to say that I didn't enjoy the job at Capitol Police, but I've told a lot of people, essentially, it's a security-oriented position, and your job is to maintain the safety of members of Congress. And I'll be honest with you, at that time, there were no members of Congress that I was willing to trade my life for. And so I just—
How about now?
Still now.
It's even worse.
Even worse now. So I ended up going for a more traditional law enforcement route. DC Police is the traditional law enforcement agency in Washington, D.C. If you call 911, we're the ones that responded. That being said, I did about 6 months in patrol before I got the hell out. Customer service, policing was not my thing. I got into my first specialized unit was a street crimes unit that focused on illegal firearms trafficking and also violent crimes committed with firearms. I spent about 9 months in that unit before I moved into narcotics, and spent the rest of my career working in various narcotics units in Washington, D.C.
And just to fast forward to, I think, a pivotal point of the conversation, and that is what took place on January 6th. I guess one of the questions that I've always sort of wondered about, and I don't think we've talked about this before, because I remember this at the time when I was at the White House, is that there were rumblings that stuff could go down on January 6th. And I talked to a source who said, look at that Trump tweet where he said it's going to be wild. And I thought to myself, what does that mean? Were you guys inside the MPD at that time getting any intelligence, getting any sense that things could get pretty brutal, pretty nasty on January 6th?
No. I mean, there's a misconception that like the rank and file law enforcement is somehow better informed than the general public. I think that's couldn't be further from the truth. We're probably less informed because most cops don't pay any attention to, to certainly not to politics. I was apolitical the vast majority of my career, but also, even to things like national news or even local news. There's I think a resentment between law enforcement and their relationship with local newscasters and just the media in general. And so, they don't really pay attention. I certainly didn't pay attention. And I was aware of the fact that there was a protest taking place. I knew the motivation behind the protest. It was a Stop the Steal rally. I knew that, Donald Trump was telling people that the election had been stolen. At that point, I had the benefit of 4 years of Trump and found him to kind of be a buffoon and somebody who said incendiary things like that often, and didn't really lend any credence to it. I was aware that, obviously our department's deployment had been changed. But that takes place all the time. In Washington, D.C., we call them First Amendment assemblies, but essentially a protest that takes place every single day. And so, it was a regular occurrence to have officers retasked from their regular assignments to staff these types of events. And that's what happened on January 6th. That being said, I worked in a narcotics unit. I spent a lot of time in an undercover capacity. And fortunately for me, I was able to avoid those types of assignments. And so, for me, it was, at least at the beginning of the day, it was business as usual.
Yeah. And that makes me wonder, how did you get called in that day?
So I didn't actually get called in.
Oh, okay.
My regular shift, I think, started at 3 p.m.
Yeah.
that morning, I got a phone call from my partner at the time, Jimmy Albright, and Jimmy was like, "Hey, I'm hearing some crazy shit that's happening at the Stop the Steal rally." In that, we had undercover officers, intel officers that were monitoring the protest, as is commonplace. I mean,
standard operating procedure.
Exactly, and so these officers were reporting things like armed individuals in the crowd, which is not normal.
No.
And there were several arrests that were made of individuals. Obviously, in Washington, D.C. at that time, it was unlawful to bring an unregistered firearm into the district. And so several individuals were arrested there on the outer perimeter of the Stop the Steal rally. And so that was strange, but not, it certainly didn't make me think about going into work early or changing the game plan for the day. It wasn't until, shortly before noon, I think, I got some more phone calls from colleagues, namely Jimmy, and they were reporting that a large group had broken off from the rally and was walking to the Capitol. So at that point, I started to get ready, and I kind of made the decision that I was going to go in early, but I took my sweet time. And by 1 o'clock, I had just left the house, and I was living in, just outside of D.C. at the time, in Alexandria. And I got a call from Jimmy, and he said, "Turn your radio on." Jimmy lived out in Deal, Maryland, and was outside of the radio reception area. And so he knew I would be able to tune in and actually hear what was happening. And I had two radios at the time. I had an FBI radio because I was an FBI task force officer. And I also had an MPD radio. So I was listening to two different channels, and all I heard was distress calls coming from the Capitol. Namely, a guy who you may or may not be familiar, depending on how much you know about January 6th or have watched. But there was a commander from the Special Operations Division. His name is Robert Glover. If you were an MPD officer or any DC, law enforcement agency, you were familiar with Robert Glover. Robert Glover was like I said, the commander of Special Operations. They are the bureau or the division within the department that takes over in these First Amendment assemblies. He's the guy on the ground that coordinates law enforcement's response to protests, specifically once they turn violent. And he's, I think I've described him before as he's like Rain Man. He has no personality. He's probably the least likable person that you'll ever meet. But he is like a savant when it comes to deploying law enforcement assets to handle these types of protests. He is a consummate professional, and he is always cool, calm, and collected. And so hearing him on the radio with his voice cracking, almost, becoming emotional, was really disconcerting to me, because I had heard him on the radio so many times before. And this is a guy who is now, I remember it, crystal clear, like so vividly saying, the outer Lower West Terrace perimeter has been breached. Officers are being assaulted. And that was the first of countless distress calls that came out from command staff, from individual officers throughout the day. And I spent the better part of my drive from Alexandria into the 1st District Station just listening to officers calling out for distress. And so that's when I made the decision that, I was not going to, go about my regular scheduled activity of the day. It was going to be, I'm putting a uniform on, which is not something that I had done for over a decade. And I was going to be responding to the Capitol. And that's what I did.
So you were a plainclothes officer.
Yeah.
And then on January 6th, put the uniform on, you went in.
I literally took my uniform out of the plastic bags
Wow.
that had been issued to me, was pulling the price tag off the shirts.
Wow.
And putting that crap together. People ask me you got into work at 1:30, what took you so long? You didn't get to the Capitol till just before 3. And I'm like, well, you get the belt you got to put all that crap on the belt.
Yeah.
I put it all together.
Yeah.
From scratch.
Right. And so you get down there, it was close to 3, I guess. Is that what you're saying? And so at that point, all hell's breaking loose.
Oh, all hell had already broken loose.
Oh,
it had
yeah.
been breaking loose for, I mean, the original breach, the perimeter breach was at 1 p.m., just before 1 p.m., I think 12:58. And then by the time I got there,
because I was wondering how you got into that crowd. Like, how did you find yourself? You just went in there to start helping and try to pull people back. How did that go down?
So I ended up, my partner and I, we drive up to the Capitol. And if you're familiar with the U.S. Capitol, you know that there's like a perimeter around the Capitol. And so you can't just, I mean, you could drive up like Independence Avenue, Constitution Avenue through the Capitol complex, but those were completely blocked off by police vehicles. I mean, there was just tons of police vehicles parked there. So Jimmy and I thought we would go on, I think it's D Street, which is that just outside of the barricades, and that we would drive up like South Capitol Street, or drive by like Longworth House Office Building. So we get there and there's a Capitol police officer at the barricade. The barricades were up and we're in a marked police vehicle in full uniform. And the officers wouldn't let us in because they said we didn't have permission to go into into the Capitol.
Wow.
So we ended up like parking there. And listen, in the moment, I probably could have gotten out and choked both of those officers to death.
Yeah.
But you realize like,
it's just bedlam. It's
absolute chaos. Utter hell's breaking loose. They're not receiving any type of commands over the radio. The command structure had completely broken down at that point inside of U.S. Capitol Police. And so, these officers reverted back to, their most basic directives, which is if you're not authorized, you don't get into the Capitol. And so while it was like semi-aggravating and comical all at once, like Jimmy and I just said, fuck it, we parked our car and decided we're going to walk 2 blocks to the Capitol, which is what we did. And it was surreal. I mean, it was dead quiet. There was no pedestrians out on the complex until we got to Independence Avenue. And once we got to Independence Avenue, you see this, sea of police cars. A lot of them are unoccupied, still have their sirens going off, and it's just super chaotic. There was maybe a few hundred protesters kind of milling about. And other than that, I mean, if you've ever walked up from the south side of the Capitol, you know that like the West Terrace is pretty much obscured from your vision. So I couldn't see the fact that there was like 10 to 15,000 people gathered on the west front of the Capitol. All I could see was these couple hundred idiots that were, marching around and carrying Trump paraphernalia and crap and chanting. And so Jimmy and I made our way in there. We didn't see like any real sense of urgency at that point. We got inside the Capitol, made our way to the crypt area, which is, the center of the Capitol complex just beneath Statuary Hall. And we were just kind of like there. And I'm listening to my radio, trying to figure out like there's got to be some place that they're calling for officers or somewhere we can go and actually be useful. And at one point, a distress call comes out for the Lower West Terrace Tunnel. And it was a 1033, which is our 10 code for officers in need of assistance. And so I remember looking at Jimmy and I was like, which way is west? And he, figures it out, and we end up making our way down this set of stairs. And next thing you know, we're in the Lower West Terrace Tunnel. If you're not familiar, it's like a long corridor. You come up on 2 sets of double doors. They're just big wooden doors with glass panes. And I remember looking, like that's the first thing that drew my attention, was looking through these glass panes. And I could see the backs of officers through the doors. But what first caught me was I could see what I immediately recognized was CS gas, which is a chemical irritant that law enforcement deploys. And it was just lingering in the air inside of this tunnel. What I later learned was that, while officers were deploying this chemical agent to try to disperse the crowd, that many of the rioters had brought the simplest apparatus, oven mitts, because they knew that these containers come out white hot. And so to pick them up and throw them back at law enforcement, they knew they needed to bring something that they could do that. And so, we had guys that were picking them up and throwing them back into the tunnel. And so, obviously it's bad enough breathing in CS gas in an open air environment. It's really bad when it's in a closed environment like a tunnel like we were in. And it's even worse when you're so vain that you don't bring your gas mask because you think it looks stupid.
Yeah.
Which is what I did.
That's what you did. Okay. Well, now you know. Now you know. And Mike, I mean, we know that you ended up getting in a situation where you were assaulted and you were afraid for your life at that point. What happened then? What was that part like?
Yeah, so Jimmy and I get into the tunnel. I mean, I felt like I had an obligation having just gotten there, and I had actually had a brief conversation moments before with a friend of mine, Bill Bogner, who I knew from the 1st District. He used to be an admin officer there. Excuse me, he was working at the academy at the time, an administrative guy who self-deployed to the Capitol, like so many hundreds of officers, just took it upon himself to go. And he was telling me how, these guys that were out there had been fighting, with no relief. And so I was like, I just got here. I feel like I have a responsibility to go up front and be in the front of this group of officers. And so Jimmy and I made our way to the front, and it was like the president said, it was wild. I don't know if you guys have seen, there's some really good videos of kind of what transpired. If you can imagine, I think in my first interview, I described it as like a medieval battle scene. And that's really accurate in that you couldn't slide a credit card between two people in that tunnel. And so, I mean, this idea that we were fighting, it's kind of a misconception. I mean, you couldn't even throw a punch. It was literally just officers using their body weight to try to push, the opposition, the rioters out of the tunnel, and vice versa.
That's my hand when you're good.
At taking place over the course of hours. And so, and then throw in, metal objects and tear gas and bear spray and CS gas and all these other factors. And so, we were just pushing, and there was a point in time where, we were losing a considerable amount of ground. And then I don't, there was never a point in time where I was afraid. And I attribute a lot of that to one of the first people that I saw after I saw Bill Bach, was a really good friend of mine, Ray Cotton. He was the commander of our, he ran all of the investigative units in the city. He was the head of our detectives bureau, investigative services bureau. And he's a guy that I had known even before I came to DC Police. We had known each other at Capitol Police and even before that. And I don't know, there was just something like very reassuring for me and calming to see somebody that I knew that was there. And so instantly you switch from like, this is a situation I can't handle to just doing the job. And the job was, fighting alongside these other officers. And so, fast forward 15 minutes and I find myself at the front of this scrum. And, at one point I'm face to face with this guy. His name was Albuquerque Cosper Head. He's from Tennessee. And I remember being so close to him, and we had this kind of like really surreal moment in which he's like, man, I'm getting squished. And I was like, yeah, I'm getting squished too. And he's like, man, I feel bad for you guys. And I was like, yeah, this sucks. And I like that's a real conversation that transpired between me and this guy. And then I could smell, like I knew I used to dip. So I knew he had mint skull. And I could smell it. And I was like, man, that would be really good right now. And it's weird, like how, I mean, that was probably played out over the course of like 3 seconds. And like, that was a legitimate, conversation I had and thoughts that I was having at that time. And then, just a few moments later, the momentum shifted and we started pushing them out of the tunnel. And next thing you know, he wrapped his arms around my neck and started pulling me. And at first he said, I'm going to try to help you out here. And then the next thing I remember him screaming out was, I got one. And at that point I was pulled away from the police line out into the crowd. And then it was just, pure chaos. I was getting, struck from every direction. People were restraining me. Guys were grabbing my arms. I remember vividly a guy named Kyle Young, who started lunging at me, and he was trying to grab my gun that was holstered, and remove it from the holster. And I remember at that point, like all of my attention just turned to retaining my firearm, making sure that nobody was able to grab it. But at the same time, like I'm using both hands to do that. And I'm wide open to getting punched in the face and hit in the head. And so it was, then it's just pure survival. What can I do to survive the situation? A lot of things were crossing my mind. I was thinking about, using my firearm. And then I was like, well, if I'm probably going to get stripped away from me before I even pull it out of the holster. If I do that, these people are like, they're out for blood. That'll be the justification that they need to use, to kill me, if they need that. And then I remember getting tased in the neck. Daniel Rodriguez, from California, used a taser device, that he, interestingly enough, got earlier that day from Kyle Young, even though the two of them didn't know each other. And he drove it into my neck numerous times. And I think at that point, I remember yelling out that I have kids, which was very intentional. I said it because I was hoping to appeal to somebody in the crowd and hope that they would
step in or something,
protect me.
Yeah.
And some people did. I mean, it was a very, I've used this term a lot tonight, surreal experience to have people trying to beat the shit out of me or kill me, and then others trying to fight them back and provide, protection. And ultimately, those individuals won out, and I was assisted back to the police line where I completely collapsed and was unconscious.
Well, Mike, I hope you'll forgive me, and I owe you lots of beers later for asking you to retell that story. But I think it's important because of what we're up against right now. We're up against a tidal wave of disinformation coming from Donald Trump coming from the White House, coming from his allies and the conservative media, and they are trying to rewrite what took place on January 6th. They are trying to transform what took place on that day, as you were indicating earlier, into some kind of story of where the people who were attacking the Capitol were somehow the victims in all of this, which is an absolute joke and, you know, just a horrible, awful thing. Couple of questions come to mind. One is, and I know you and I have talked about this before, but did you think he could get back into the White House? Did you think he could come back and win in 2024? Or did you think, man, there's just no way, after what took place on January 6th, there's just no way he's going to get back in there? Or did you think maybe there was a chance?
I think once McCarthy went down to Mar-a-Lago and you saw the whole narrative shift within the Republican Party. Yeah. I mean, the vast majority of my friends at that time were Trump supporters. And when I saw the party shift in that manner, I saw my friends' reactions, even guys that were in law enforcement, even guys that were, 6 inches away from me inside the Lower Terrace Tunnel. I saw it open up the ability for them to somehow justify continuing to support this guy who incited an insurrection and sent thousands of Americans to the Capitol to attack law enforcement officers. And so I knew that it was going to be, I was deeply concerned pretty early on.
Yeah.
And then obviously, everything that transpired. And then, I wrote a book, toured the country, talked to people all across the country. I worked with an organization called Courage for America, toured the country with them, speaking at, community events and small gatherings all across the country. And those conversations were great, very positive, but those were people that already, were supportive and understood, what I'd experienced. The things that concerned me were like when I would stop off at the gas station, off some like obscure highway or byway and have a conversation with the people there who had absolutely no idea about January 6th. If they did, they, regurgitated some conspiratorial nonsense about it. And then for the most part, we're happy that Trump had given them a $2,400 COVID check, and we're really hoping that they would get another $2,400 check from Trump. And then I was like, oh, we're fucked.
Yeah. And we were. And he gets into office, and the very first thing that he does is he pardons all of those thugs, criminals, goons, white supremacists. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Mm-hmm. And I remember you and I talking about this and your reaction when you heard that. Because I remember at the time, there was a lot of, I was still at my old place and we were reporting, and there was a lot of the reporting that was going on at that time was, there's just no way he'll pardon all of them. And I think even J.D. Vance got in some trouble. He was the incoming vice president. He was saying, well, the really bad ones, they're probably not going to get pardons. So everybody thought there wasn't a way he would just pardon all of them. And then that turkey pardoned all of them.
Yeah, I can't get inside of Donald Trump's head. So I have no idea what the thought process is, but I'm kind of convinced that not to take away from like how disgusting that act was, but I kind of just think he did it out of laziness.
Right.
Like, I don't want to review 1,500 plus cases, so let's just fucking pardon them all. And I say that because there was a reporter, I think it was an NBC reporter, that asked Trump, I think immediately after he pardoned them, he said, there was this guy, Daniel Rodriguez, and on January 6, 2021, he drove a stun gun into a DC police officer's neck numerous times. The officer suffered a heart attack and a traumatic brain injury, has since left the department. What, do you think he deserves to be pardoned? And yet, obviously, he had already pardoned him.
Yeah.
But he said, well, we're going to review that. We're not just going to do things whatever. And he's like, but you've already pardoned him. And then he, of course, moved on from that question. And so I don't, like a lot of things, I don't think Trump actually wants to govern. And I know now we're getting down in another, and I'll rein it back in, but I think he's just wants.
I agree. Yeah.
He just wants to play golf and be rich and get more money off of all of our backs. And so, when it comes to these things like, pardoning people and, governing the country, like he doesn't want to be bothered with that shit. Yeah. That being said, obviously for me,
unless it's about becoming a dictator or an autocrat, there are some things he will do that
or
government related.
That he thinks will get him the Nobel Peace Prize.
Or he thinks, yeah.
But
how's that going? But anyway, we won't talk about that.
But the election night, this Washington Post reporter had called me up a couple days earlier, and she asked if she could come sit with me and watch the election results come in on election night. And I remember sitting there with her, and she was like, well, I'm probably not going to stay all night because this will probably go until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And like by 9:30, we already knew who fucking won. And she was like, this is super depressing. And I was like, yeah, it is. And that
Just
was
a little.
And so at that point, like, yes, I took it incredibly personally. I saw it as a reflection on my inability to convince the American people that Donald Trump was dangerous. I saw it as a rejection of, my experience and the experience of hundreds of other police officers by the American people. Like, fuck you and what you went through and how it destroyed your life. We want the tax cuts, or we like the cut of his jib. And so
let's have some measles.
Right. Yeah. But so I was like,
I love measles.
And I said it in the interview. Like, fuck all of you. I'm out. You're never going to hear from me again. I'm going to try to piece my life back together. And, I did my thing for Uncle Sam, and he's a piece of shit. And, I'm just going to live here.
But I remember you and I having a conversation about this, and you were livid. I remember talking to Harry Dunn. He was livid. You guys were totally pissed off, and you had every right to be. I think you and I had a conversation at the time that maybe it might be a little healthy to kind of jump in the pro-democracy game a little bit and try to see what you can do to help. And I know others have encouraged you to do that too. What has that experience been like? Because now you have a very popular Substack. You have a very popular and growing YouTube channel. You're on Instagram. People pay attention to what you have to say now. And I know you're not doing that for that purpose, but something changed in you where you said, fuck you, to.
Yeah, January 20th, 2025, Donald Trump pardoned all the people that assaulted me.
Yeah.
So then it was like, okay, Donald Trump and his administration, they declared war on the Fanone family. Like, by Donald Trump doing that, he made life for me and my family less safe. For those of you who followed my story, you know that, my mother lived in the same house in Alexandria, Virginia for 33 years, was subjected to endless death threats, harassment from Trump supporters. So much so that she sold her house and moved to an undisclosed location as a result of that. And that's very real.
And she still faces some harassment here and there to this day.
I mean, she's in a good place now. And, we've taken all the necessary steps to protect, her. But every single member of my immediate family, my mother, my father, my brother, my sister, her family, my ex-wife, my kids, all of them have experienced threats from Trump world and Trump supporters. I mean, I had somebody in a Reddit style chat on some dark website that's affiliated with MAGA call for the rape of my 3 youngest daughters, who are 10, 12, and 14. Named them by name and doxed my ex-wife's home address. So to me, this is, listen, like, fighting for democracy is all good and well, and I'm all for that, and I'm, here for it. But this is all about defending my family. Donald Trump and MAGA are a clear and present danger to my family, to my children. And so, that is really what motivates me to get up every single day and re-engage in something that I'm really not comfortable doing. It's not how I saw my life playing out. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I'd rather be a cop. But, I'm somebody that, like, avoided, like, I'm averse to social media and the interweb and all this nonsense. I like watch these, like, YouTube videos, even the ones that I do myself, and I'm like, this is so ridiculous. Why does anybody watch this?
You're getting better, by the way.
And then, like my brother who has become, like, intimately involved in all of this and is really, like, the brain behind the whole, Michael Fanone show. And like, we have 300,000 subscribers, which is incredible. To me, it's like, why?
Because you're real, and people want it. They want it to be kept real. They want to hear this authenticity and not bullshit. And what we've been hearing from Trump lately is a lot of bullshit. Surprise, surprise. Just last weekend, he puts out a Truth Social post that says the Biden FBI had plants on the ground on January 6th. And, I wrote a Substack that said, wait a minute, first of all, you're not playing with a full deck if you think Joe Biden was the president on January 6th. You were the president on January 6th. Talk about being a couple of sandwiches short of a picnic. And the other part of this too, this whole notion that this was an inside job.
Well, first,
tackle that, because it's such horseshit.
Yes,
pardon our language. I know we're in an academic setting.
I did
Sorry,
look
Glenn.
to make sure there were no small children before I started talking.
Mostly adults.
Right. Yeah. So, and please, like, when we get to the Q&A part, fire away with all your January 6th questions. I've always, the FBI deployed 240 some agents to the Capitol complex in the aftermath of a full-scale riot in which hundreds of police officers were injured. There were no FBI agents that were implanted into the crowd to instigate anything. That is just an absolute insane, theory that was actually debunked by an insane conspiracy theorist who's now the head of the FBI, Kash Patel. So that should tell you, and it.
Talk about surreal. Yeah.
Yeah, that we'd be looking to Kash Patel for for honest and accurate information or anything that.
He also said there's nothing in the Epstein files about Trump, but anyway, that's a different subject,
right.
different panel discussion. But they're trying awfully hard
to
rewrite the history.
I think it's for me, it's wild. Having been there to watch them. There's no organized effort to rewriting the history of January 6th. It seems like there's still, like, you still have some members of the administration that are espousing this idea that it was Antifa, this organization that's not an organization and actually doesn't exist. And I'm telling you that from a law enforcement perspective, not just from somebody who's, talking out of their ass. And so
that's my job.
Right. So there was Antifa, then it was, then it was a false flag operation. Then it was police officers opening the doors and letting, insurrectionists in. And and then it was, Nancy Pelosi and a failure to call up the National Guard, which, by the way, was deployed to Washington, D.C., just not in a, riot control capacity. If you understand how the National Guard deploys, typically National Guard troops are deployed for natural emergencies,
disasters, floods,
or things like typically how we'll deploy them is like we have a protest or we have a large event in Washington, D.C. We'll use them to block streets or direct traffic, non-law enforcement, but still public safety related activities so that we free up local law enforcement to actually do things that we require law enforcement officers to do. And so we had National Guard troops deployed, but they had to return to the armory to be refitted, rekitted to go out and to perform in a crowd control capacity. And that's something that required the authorization of the President of the United States. And it was radio silence. And I've had conversations with all the upper echelon members of my department and even within the administration. I remember having this conversation with Chief Conte, in several days after January 6th. And he was like, I was sitting there on a phone call and, whoever it was from the Pentagon was just simply saying, we think it's a bad look. It would be a bad look for us to deploy the National Guard in the midst of this situation. And so that's just a complete, and I'm glad, I don't know if you guys caught that viral moment the other day between Nancy Pelosi and some, buffoon that calls herself a reporter that's actually a right-wing influencer. And she gave her what for, and I'm glad,
She tried to say, why didn't you call out the National Guard that day? And Nancy Pelosi goes, don't come at me with those Republican talking points.
Right.
Call yourself a reporter or something like that. And it was like vintage Nancy Pelosi. That made me think, maybe she should be back in charge of marshaling the Democrats a little bit. She does not play. She does not play.
Yeah.
But I will say this before moving on to another subject. None of that would have happened. And I like to say this, and I'm going to repeat it in front of this audience. None of that would have happened had Donald Trump just been a man and accepted that he lost the 2020 election. That's the end of that. I mean, that's it. That's it. None of this would have happened. There would be no January 6th, no January 6th conspiracy theories, and so on. Let's talk about ICE, because it's on the minds of, I think, a lot of the students here at UVA, people all across the country. We're seeing it take place in Chicago right now. You and I talked about this the other day. You have a law enforcement background. Your assessment of what ICE has been doing and how they've been unleashed.
So I think ICE under this administration is acting in a extrajudicious manner, which I guess is a euphemism for they're a completely lawless agency that has absolutely no accountability to the American people. They've become Donald Trump's National Police Department.
Secret police, in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, secret in the fact that there's no transparency from this agency. We don't know the identities of the individuals that are involved, but we also don't know, we can't trust the information that the agency provides us. And I'll give you a great example. I'm sure a lot of you saw, there was a raid in Chicago that took place in an apartment building that the administration told us was infested, their words, infested with Tren de Aragua gang members. Tren de Aragua is a Venezuelan street gang that does, have a significant presence in the United States. That being said, this operation that took place is something that I have never seen in my 20 years in law enforcement, in that they used 4 Black Hawk helicopters. They had ICE agents in full tactical gear in the middle of the night, like 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, rappelling onto the rooftop of this building. They went into every single apartment, raided each apartment, no individual warrants for those premises. And they handcuffed or zip tied all of the occupants, brought them outside, some of them naked, some of them in their underwear.
Elderly children.
Elderly, young children, zip-tied young children together, brought them out. And so far, what we do know is that out of those 100+ people that were subjected to that traumatic experience, only one has been shown to be loosely affiliated, not even a validated, which is a standard the Department of Justice applies when you're bringing criminal charges against an individual who is purported to be a member of a gang. So there's not a validated, just somebody who is essentially an associate of this organization. And that, and they were able to do that, which is, insane to me. That you would be able to go into a person's home without a search warrant, to me is outrageous. And as listen, like when I was a police officer, I was not a steward of the Constitution. It's a misconception that law enforcement are the stewards of the Constitution. It was fucking annoying. But that's not to say that you adhere to it. You adhere to the Constitution. I wasn't thinking about like, oh, we got to make sure, but you don't want to get in trouble, and you have to do things according to law if you want to prosecute the case. If you don't do it by the book and in accordance with the law, the Department of Justice is not going to prosecute your case. They're going to prosecute you. But in this scenario, we have a Department of Justice that is, in full alignment with the administration. I mean, I've said many times, Pam Bondi is nothing more than a corrupt political operative for Donald Trump. She has no integrity, not a lick of honesty, and no honor.
John Bolton indicted today.
Yeah.
Trump's third political enemy indicted.
Yeah.
Is this America? I mean, that.
And I think that, again, I've said it a lot of times, like in my experience is, it's not so much that we have this like overwhelming population in this country that is, in alignment, ideologically aligned with this administration. It's that we have too many Americans that are indifferent to what's happening. Too many Americans that see what's happening to, vulnerable communities in America, like the immigrant community, and they're like, well, it's not me. So, I think that we're gradually starting to see a shift in that, people see the inhumanity of this, and it's so shocking. I mean, shit, I'm a cop. I've seen everything that a major metropolitan city can throw at you as a law enforcement officer, and this shocks my conscience. Seeing people, not just the violence of it, but the unnecessary violence of the arrests and the antagonistic behavior perpetrated by ICE agents. I was called a lot of names when I was a cop, but you knew that you don't get to react. Yeah, sure, you want to, but you don't get to react. And some of the things that I've seen ICE agents do, in response to being called names. And you have to understand too, like you're enforcing an incredibly unpopular policy. And people are outraged and they're angry, and they have a right to be outraged and a right to be angry, and they have a right to protest the things that you're doing. To see agents of the government make political statements in retaliation to people protesting them is just, I mean, it's completely eroding any trust between the law enforcement community, a community I dedicated 20 years of my life to, and the communities that we're charged with protecting and keeping safe. And that's going to have a long-lasting effect in this country. It's going to be a long time, I think, before the vast majority of Americans can put faith again in our Department of Justice, in our federal agencies and our local and state agencies who've capitulated to the federal government over some of these, inhumane policies. And I think it's also going to take a tremendous amount of accountability. I've had a lot of conversations with people about, what happens when we right the ship. What do you do with the thousands of ICE agents that joined ICE during this administration, knowing full well that, they were going to be engaging in this type of conduct and behavior? What do you do with those people?
Yeah.
I mean, my answer is you fire them and you permanently ban them from ever serving as a law enforcement in this country. And the ones that engaged in criminal activity, you prosecute them. Anything short of that, I think, it's going to be difficult for Americans to, put trust in these institutions again.
Yeah, and you also have the National Guard acting as law enforcement in places like Washington, D.C. I mean, they're down on the National Mall where there's no crime. D.C. crime has been on the decline over the last several years since the pandemic ended, and they've been used to pick up garbage outside the White House. I mean, it's just outrageous.
Yeah, I think,
And I feel for those guys. I mean, I see those guys around DC.
I do.
Yeah.
I feel for them, and there's a lot of there's been a lot of protests that have talked about, and it's a difficult conversation because you have to recognize how dangerous it is that this administration seems so willing to deploy armed troops to our streets. But then you also have to look at what it is that the administration is actually having them do. And so in Washington, D.C., we now have, the benefit of 60 plus days of federal troops deployed to our streets to see what it is that the type of things they're actually engaged in. And I'll tell you, there's really two types of behavior that I've observed. There's armed touristing, in which you have, National Guard troops fully kitted out with, M4s walking around taking in the sights on the National Mall. And the other thing that they're doing is gardening. And so it's absurd and it's laughable. And I think that it's people, I bring this up because not to downplay the significance of it, because it is significant and it is outrageous, and it, people should be angry about it. But it's also, they're making the administration makes the argument that it's for public safety. And when you look at it from a public safety perspective, the only thing that you can say is that it's displacing crime for a limited period of time while these troops are deployed in specific areas. But the troops are not deployed in high crime areas. They're deployed around federal property in Washington, D.C., probably because there are some legal restrictions as to how they can be deployed, though the administration doesn't want to admit to that. And not saying that this administration isn't above violating the law and judicial orders. But when you talk about how is it that these, military service members would violate their oath? Well, technically they're not violating their oaths. They were called up. They're doing, is it wasteful spending? Sure. It's $1 million a day for their deployment just in Washington, D.C. Is it having any public safety impact whatsoever? Absolutely not. No public safety impact, 0.0. I don't care what Pam Bondi, says. That's all bullshit. Yeah. And you're disrupting these people's lives. These aren't full-time soldiers. These are people that, they're weekend warriors. They give up a weekend a month and a week a year. And now you're having them full-time, fully deployed out in these areas. They're sleeping in some shitty barracks up in Northeast Washington, D.C. that's, rat infested. I've been there a few times. And they're away from their families and they're away from their jobs. The second aspect of this federal takeover of the cities is the law enforcement surge. And as somebody who worked in numerous federal task force throughout my career. I started working in street crimes, which was focused on firearms, and we were partnered with the ATF. Then I worked, when I was with in narcotics, I worked with DEA, and then eventually I found a home with the FBI. I know the benefit of these federal partnerships. The federal resources that these agencies provide are, we need them desperately as local agencies. They provide us resources for training. They provide us resources for investigative work that we simply don't have. If you want to run a Title III case or a wiretap in Washington, D.C., you have to have a federal partner because our department doesn't have the money for that type of equipment and those type of long-term investigations. That being said, that's not how these agencies are being deployed in Washington, D.C. They're not beefing up federal task force. They're not doing investigative work and surgically removing criminals from our streets.
They're just walking around.
They're walking. You've got an FBI agent who's the American taxpayers spent hundreds of thousands of dollars training this person in some of the most advanced investigative techniques that we have available to us. And these guys have now been pulled from sophisticated international cases or domestic terrorist cases or child trafficking cases or violent criminal cases. And they're walking a footbeat in Northwest Washington, D.C., along with like 20 of their buddies. And they're just aimlessly out and about. And yes, did they make arrests? They did make arrests. They made what we call probable cause arrests. These are arrests in which an officer observed some type of conduct or may conduct a stop based off of reasonable suspicion or some other standard.
Yeah.
And then, but those are not cases that federal agents typically make.
Right.
And so, the idea that they are interchangeable with local law enforcement, when we used to say like FBI agents are essentially worthless on the street. Street cops do street work. FBI agents bring the investigative tools, the investigative know-how, and all the resources to bear of the federal government. And so that's the benefit of those partnerships. It's not how it's being utilized. And that's why you're seeing 80% of the arrests that were made during that deployment were bullshit, were misdemeanor arrests. And of the 20% that were felonies, the vast majority of those have been thrown out by the Department of Justice. And this is a Department of Justice now that's run by Pam Bondi and Janine Pirro. So if they're throwing the cases out, they're fucked up.
Yeah, right. Make sure you have your box of wine on standby, I guess. All right, well, we've made it to the portion of the event where we're going to take your questions from the audience. And I want to start with my friend Tara Setmayer, who is here tonight. She's also a scholar here at UVA, a gentle lady and a scholar. And Mike was talking earlier about not losing to complacency, not losing to the couch, as it's been called. And we certainly don't want to lose people to J.D. Vance's couch, but that's a whole other thing altogether. But what's coming up over the next couple of days here in Charlottesville and all around the country, pretty darn important. No King's Day is on Saturday. I assume many of you will be out in force on No King's Day to make your voices heard. And then here at UVA, folks have been dealing with a very serious situation where the Trump administration is trying to impose its will on this university, on Thomas Jefferson's University, through this bullshit compact where they're saying, you got to do things our way in exchange for federal money. But Tara, you're going to be here at this protest tomorrow. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that and what your thoughts are?
Well, thank you,
and
Jim.
Tara's with the Seneca Project.
Hi, everybody.
Yeah.
Hi. It's always a pleasure to be back on grounds as a resident scholar here for the center. It's really a humbling honor and privilege. And to be able to participate in conversations like this with my good friends, Jim Acosta and Michael Fanone, it means a lot to me because it really represents everything that we stand for. I come from a law enforcement family. Those who have followed me and are familiar with me, my years here at the center, know how important the issue of law enforcement and honoring the badge is. And Michael Fanone is an absolute hero, along with many of the other gentlemen who have spoken out about this. They actually honor the badge. And what this administration has done is continually dishonor the badge. And we cannot let them get away with that. And I want to follow up on something that Michael said earlier about the reason why so many people seem to shrug this off, that this apathy, the indifference. How much more is it going to take for people to wake up and stand up? We are at an inflection point in this country, and we have a choice of what are we going to do? History does not remember the quiet. I recently gave a TED talk about this. It's called Stand Up or Stand By. Is moral courage the revolution that we need? And I think that the moment that we're all in, people in this room have made the decision to stand up. The people who are going to be on grounds tomorrow protesting against this compact where Trump is trying to impose silencing, basically, dissent. Thomas Jefferson would have some things to say about that, I think.
Yeah.
And what better place than to stand up and speak out than right here at the university that Thomas Jefferson founded. Whether it's the student body, whether it's with our media, whether it's the No Kings protest on Saturday where history will be made, it's another opportunity for people to stand up and speak up and say no, because we have to.
Yeah.
Generations before us shed blood so that we could speak up freely now. And I'll be damned if I'm going to be part of the generation that lost democracy in this country.
Right on.
So we have the opportunity to do that. So thank you guys. Thank you for what you're doing. And we're America, no kings.
Okay. I'm going to ask Sam, my producer, to hand the microphone to Sophia. I mentioned some breaking news earlier. Sophia is a student here at the University of Virginia and is a student journalist. And up until recently was with WUVA, if I have that correct, which is the TV station for the students here at UVA. And you were trying to grill the president of the university on this compact. And as a result of that, you were told you could no longer be a student journalist with WUVA. Yeah. Is that right? Do I have that correct? Yeah. Nobody has heard about this yet. I just want to, for the people who are watching this on the streaming, I want to tell you, this is something that we're talking about right now for the first time. A student journalist at the University of Virginia got shown the door because she tried to ask hard questions of the president here. Sophia, you have the floor.
Hi, Jim. Hi, Michael. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. I've really enjoyed the commentary.
Yeah. And good for you for standing strong, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah. Hi, I'm Sophia. I'm a politics major, 4th year at UVA here and a former intern for the Center for Politics. Up until 24 hours ago, I was a student reporter for WUVA, which is an independent student news outlet here on grounds for the past several decades. Last week, we got the opportunity to speak with interim President Mahoney on the changes going on at UVA. I was tasked to be a producer on that project and create the questions. I had worked with the students and we all agreed prior to that interview that this was going to be a tough interview to talk about everything from President Ryan's sudden resignation to the compact to deportation on grounds. And then last minute, the primary interviewer, a student, decided to not share those questions and more go the softball question route. And in that moment, I spoke up to ask him specific questions like, what don't you like about the compact? What do you say to students who are afraid that ICE might come onto grounds regardless of their legal status? What do you say to the student council no confidence vote who's argued that they don't know why the board selected you and if you were on that public nominations list? And of course, he gave me very media trained answers. He refused to answer some questions or placed it on another department. But later that afternoon, I got a call from the president, who was also a student, who demanded that I apologize for those questions. He made it clear that one story, quote, one story does not make or break WUVA, but these relationships with the school are extremely important. I made clear that I was not going to apologize. I spoke with members of WUVA's board.
Good.
I spoke with WUVA's board, who are filled with UVA alumni, who are journalists, who favored my position, who told me not to apologize, but also made clear that, you know, an important principle here at UVA is student self-governance. So they can't really intervene in student leadership for the club. And then last night, I was told that I was being insubordinate for not apologizing, and that they would be terminating my affiliation with the group. And that was quite demoralizing, because this was, you know, my peers. And I think it reflected that even independent student journalists are feeling the pressure, the culture of not saying certain things to institution for fear of being reprimanded. So yeah, definitely still hurts.
Well, thank you
Yeah.
for sharing that. And I just want to say that you should be commended for standing up for the First Amendment and for doing your job. And shame on UVA for doing that to you. Shame on this interim president for doing that to you. But something tells me you're going to keep charging after this experience. So you should do that. You should definitely keep charging. But thank you very much, Sophia. Thanks for sharing that. I want to get to other folks in the audience who might have some questions. This gentleman all the way over here, sorry, Sam, he was raising his hand, I think 15 minutes ago. So he gets to go first. And as we like to say, make sure it's a question, not a speech.
No,
okay.
very brief, because I'm getting over a sore throat too.
Thank you.
All
Right,
but it says, I'm researching on the internet, I'm puzzled about. It says primarily each state's governor functions as the commander-in-chief of the National Guard within their state. So how is it that Trump can usurp that power?
Well, he's challenging that right now. He sent the National Guard into California against the wishes of Gavin Newsom. He's done that in Illinois. J.B. Pritzker has said no to that. This is now being tested in the courts. And, you know, Donald Trump is basically asserting that since he's the supreme commander-in-chief, that he can do what he wants with the National Guard. But this is being adjudicated as we speak. We'll have to see how it plays out. But I was, you know, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that the toothpaste is already out of the tube.
Yeah.
Some of these things are already taking place, right, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, the pattern that I've seen, you know, I think all of us have witnessed it with this administration, is that they act first, and then they leave it up to, you know, the aggrieved party to adjudicate it in the court. I mean, if you look at, you know, everything they've done with, you know, whether it was Gavin Newsom or anyone else, they just act because there's no one that's going to stop them. I mean, the agencies themselves, you know, the guard troops they're not saying, no, we're not going to be deployed. They're not refusing to be deployed. They're deploying. And so then it becomes, you know, it's up to the states to adjudicate it in court. And that just seems to be the thought process behind this administration with pretty much everything.
Yeah. Who would like to go next, ma'am? How about you? Yes, ma'am.
So, Michael, thank you for sharing your story. That's just an incredible, horrible story. And I think most people, Republican or Democrat, would think it's horrible. But Jim, why is mainstream media not telling us this story? Because I've watched CNN since January 6th, 2021. I've never heard this story, and I watch it pretty regularly. So we're not hearing it. And I feel like right now we're getting maybe the reason, and you can comment on this, is they want people's eyes, and eyes have to be so that they show something that's conspiracy, so that they get people to continually watch. If they showed this story once, it'd be done. People would say that's a horrible story. It should not continue.
I think I will quarrel a little bit with the premise of your question, but agree with it in that the mainstream media, the legacy media, the corporate media has not done enough to tell the story of January 6th, Mike's story, and so on. I will say that there have been some, including my old place, that have done documentaries that did highlight what took place and what happened to Mike, what happened to other officers who were there responding that day. But you raise a very good point. And I think the overarching point is that we've somehow allowed a situation to emerge in this country where there are two realities when it comes to January 6th. There is only one reality, and it's the one that Mike Fanone told us about tonight. And one of the reasons why I wanted to do this evening is it needs to be preserved and memorialized for the record what took place in this country. The President of the United States, Donald Trump, at that time incited an insurrection, sent a mob to the Capitol in order to try to overturn the election results from that 2020 election. That's just what happened. And it got so out of control that people died, police officers later died from suicide and so on, and we almost had lawmakers killed that day, including the vice president. And that is the truth. That what happened to Mike, what happened on that day, as we know it, is the truth. But what Trump is trying to do right now, he's trying to pull a 1984 on us. He is trying to get us to look through the looking glass and see up as down and black as white. And part of the reason why I wanted to do this event with Mike here is to make sure it is always captured. This is always now going to be living on the internet, on YouTube, wherever else, and people will know this story, know what happened to Mike. And it's important that we continue to tell those stories. They want to whitewash it. They want to put it away. They want to rewrite the history of it. We can't let that happen.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. I think that you might be giving too much credit to the American people as far as like how people digest media. I mean, I've had these conversations all across the country. So you've got, people that are engaged, and by engaged, I mean, they watch legacy media, they watch CNN, they watch MSNBC. If you watch those two news networks, you're probably not going to watch Fox News and vice versa. If you watch Fox News, you never saw anything about January 6th at all. And then if you watch,
they were running these. Remember, Tucker Carlson was running these conspiracy
theories and
stuff.
About just all types of insanity, and he got access to literally hundreds of thousands of hours of CCTV footage from the Capitol, and he ended up cherry picking what amounted to like 15 seconds worth of video from that day to, in his mind, tell the total story of what actually happened on January 6th, which, it didn't do well. And there were actually a number of people that quit the network over that. And I think Chris Wallace was one of them, and several others. Tucker Carlson eventually lost his job. But the point I was trying to make is most people that I talk to don't watch CNN, they don't watch MSNBC, and they don't watch Fox News. They get their news from Facebook, or they get their news from Reddit, or they get their news from, TikTok or some of these other things that I don't fucking understand. And so it's like, and those, now you see like, you've got these independent journalists that have started to occupy the space. So at least you can say there's, you've got traditional guys like Jim who are occupying the independent media space. Don Lemon is doing a great job. Joy Reid's doing a great job. But then you have these other non-traditional folks like Aaron Parnas, who, I mean, if you don't follow him, he's great. I think he does an excellent job because like my 22-year-old daughter likes him, but like, I can't stand him. I think it's weird that he does all of his newscasting from couch and wears these like oversized headphones, but whatever the kids
he's a hardworking young man.
Yeah. Whatever the kids like. I mean, he's got like 10 billion followers. So, but
that's okay.
So there are people out there that are doing it the right way in these spaces. But prior to, I don't know anybody that was credible prior to maybe like 2 years ago that was occupying the space. Like around the January 6th time, it was just insanity. And I mean, if you're on Twitter, I don't know if anybody here is on Twitter, if you've seen what that has become, I mean, it's just
an abomination.
Yeah. It's like the dark web of.
It is. And that's what Elon Musk wanted it to become. And Mike makes a great point. And I think it gets to your question, which is independent media is now thriving in this country. Yeah. People are subscribing to places like Substack. They're going on YouTube to watch this. My dad, who's in his 70s, watches the news on YouTube now, watches my show, other shows on YouTube. And people are just circumventing the old legacy corporate media because they're looking at what's happening. Look what just took place with CBS. They put some right-wing person, Barry Weiss, in charge of CBS after she ran something called the Free Press, which is an Orwellian name in and of itself.
Yeah.
And, you know, CBS pays a $15 million bribe to Donald Trump. ABC pays a $15 million bribe to Donald Trump. These companies are spinning off entities of their corporate parent company, and they need the FCC and Donald Trump and the administration to sign off on a lot of these media deals and mergers. And the entire industry is compromised now. You have Jeff Bezos over at the Washington Post has run off all of these incredibly talented journalists there. And the Washington Post is now a shell of its former self. The good news is that a lot of those great journalists, Glenn, who used to run the fact check at the Washington Post, Glenn Kessler, I believe his name is, now runs a fact check site on Substack. And so, and Don and Joy and Mike and myself, we're on Substack and YouTube and lots of other places. So there are places where you can turn, but we're in a bit of an evolution right now. We're now moving to what's next in media. And in terms of, we're just not seeing these stories. And I cover them every day on my show. Mike talks about them on his show. And I think folks have to be intelligent consumers, discriminating consumers, find those places where now you can get that truth away from the corporate media. That is, let's face it, they're afraid. They're running scared right now. Let me just, I want to move around the room because we have limited time. This gentleman right here in the vest, sharp looking vest right here, this man.
Michael, I have a question about ICE, and I don't know how well you knew ICE or you know, have had experience with them, but there's heavy recruiting going on right now. And I'm sure they're attracting lots of racist thugs who like nothing better than to zip tie immigrants and march them out into the street in preparation for leaving the country. But was ICE always like that? I mean, where are the people who have been in ICE for a long time? Were they secretly like that as well? Has ICE always been a villainous bunch of people that hate immigrants?
No, not at all. I mean, I had very limited interactions with ICE, purposefully so, because traditionally, you know, local law enforcement and ICE didn't interact and we didn't participate in immigration, enforcement, because local law enforcement agencies are charged with policing and providing, you know, public safety to all of the residents of our community. And we have a large immigration population in Washington, D.C., and many of them are undocumented. But we want to make sure that those people are reporting crimes to us. And so they have to feel safe that they're not going to become, you know, they're not going to be deported because they were a victim of a crime and they decide to call 911 or one of their relatives. And also it benefits the whole community in that, you know, let's say a legal resident is a victim of a crime and it happens to be an undocumented person that was a witness to that crime. Well, we want that witness to come forward and provide us with that information. And that's why we don't conduct enforcement, you know, operations with ICE. That being said, my encounters with them were limited, mostly to, you know, passing in court, having a cup of coffee together and whatnot. But they were an investigative agency. Typically, the way that an ICE deportation worked was somebody came in contact with law enforcement, they were arrested, they were adjudicated. It was determined through that process that they were undocumented. In the federal system, if it was a felony, it was reported to ICE. ICE would get a retainer warrant, and then, you know, the decision would be made whether they were going to serve a sentence here in the country prior to being deported or whether they were just going to be deported immediately. But it was a very sterile process. You didn't see street activity conducted by ICE. I mean, we used to laugh that like the ICE guys were the ones that wore khaki pants and a polo shirt all the time because they weren't real cops. And I think they probably would have been the first people to admit that to you as well. I think what you've ended up seeing now is this influx of ICE, of Customs and Border Patrol, which, you know, the border's closed now. So we have a lot of Border Patrol agents that don't have shit to do. And so they've been retasked or deployed throughout the country. And that, you know, just because you're a law enforcement officer, not all law enforcement officers engage in the same, you know, policing is very much so what's the word I'm looking for? Public, you know, customer service oriented business. You know, we serve the public, and there's we interact with the public so regularly that, you know, you develop a way of communicating with people, even when they did something wrong. ICE, Customs and Border Patrol, like very different. Customs and Border Patrol to me is much more of like a military style operation than it is, street policing. And so now you've got these people being retasked to street policing. And that's why you see this, egregious conduct playing out in American streets. When you speak to go ahead.
No, I was just saying, and Republican and Democratic administrations prior to this one did border and immigration enforcement. I mean, It did happen. I covered Barack Obama during his second term over at the White House when they used to when a lot of these groups that are pro-immigration would call him the deporter in chief. And he got in trouble with the Latino community for that. And so, I mean, to say that this just like Donald Trump all of a sudden started doing enforcement activities is it's just a lie.
The last thing I want to touch on, you were saying, the vast majority of law enforcement officers in this country are not, racist, people who are prone to violence. That's not to say that there aren't individuals that seek out this career who are prone to violence and, who are incredibly racist individuals. I think the vast majority of the people that you see coming into ICE right now are attracted by the $50,000 signing bonus.
Yeah.
$50,000 to the vast majority of Americans is like a life-changing amount of money.
And some of them have been going to these ICE hiring events and saying that they're very pro-Trump.
Right.
That's been taking place too.
Yeah.
Is that some of these folks, they want to get involved and they want to help him carry out this mass deportation policy.
Yeah, I mean, there's an ideological alignment and a financial attraction to that. The difference that we have today in dealing with the racist, violent individuals that come into this profession is there are no longer any mechanisms to remove those individuals. The Department of Justice has eliminated its public corruption units, and those are the units that would go and investigate officers who are accused of gross misconduct, violating individual civil rights, and that doesn't exist anymore. And so you have this agency now that is has no transparency and is unaccountable to the American people. There's no way to go and file a complaint against an ICE agent. It doesn't exist.
Well, folks, I just want to say thank you so much. And unless somebody has a real pressing question they want to get to, I just want to say,
come on.
What should we do?
We can do a couple.
Okay, all right. This nice lady right here. You were brave enough to sit in the front row.
Really, thank you.
And
Because
heard
I really.
Mike and I use some salty language, which I do not apologize for at all, by the way.
No, please. No,
Yeah.
thank you so much, both
Yeah.
of you, for coming here. It's been a great honor to have you. And I must say that, I hope there's a lot of people online because
Yeah.
I was surprised that there wasn't standing room only here.
Yeah.
And it goes to my question that what really more can we do about the apathy and the fear? I acknowledge you for how you have managed the fear of what's happening to your family and so forth.
Yeah.
I talked to some of my friends about going to the No Kings and they're afraid to go. What
Don't
if
be
a car,
afraid.
what if a
No,
car,
no, don't
runs
be
into
afraid.
the line of people?
Well, in Charlottesville, I can understand why people would have that.
Right,
Sure.
yeah.
That's right. I understand. I remember covering.
So, I'm just wondering, you of all people can help us understand. I'm a psychologist and I'm still struggling with how to deal with the fear and the danger that we're facing now and how to help my clients, other people deal with it. And maybe by your example, you can tell us.
It's easy for me. I've got 4 daughters. The only thing that I think about in pursuing this work is, leaving this country better than the way that I received it for them. So I'm not really worried about, my safety or and then, my recommendation is the same to everybody in this room is, show up to these protests, encourage your friends and family members to go to the protests as well and peacefully protest this administration. And the other thing is, have these conversations. And I don't encourage anybody or advocate for anyone to try to convince people that may be supportive of this administration. what I want people to do is convince those that don't support this administration, but are just apathetic, who are not, getting out and voting, who are not attending these protests, who are not letting their voice be heard. Talk to those people. Have a conversation about what ICE is doing. Let them know, like, is this the kind of country that you want to live in? Is this the kind of country that you want your children to live in? And so that would be my recommendation.
And I would just say that, ma'am, I believe that we are right now in the middle of the cause of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Donald Trump, as Mike said earlier, poses a threat to our democracy. I think he poses a threat to our future. I think he poses a threat to our country. And it is incumbent upon all of us, man, woman, child, grandma, grandpa, whoever you may be, to think about the loved ones in your life and ask yourself what Mike was just saying a few moments ago. Is this the kind of country you want to hand off to your children and grandchildren? And if it is not, you must contact the people in your life and convince them, if they're on the sidelines, to get off the sidelines. One of the things that gets tossed around a lot is something called Trump derangement syndrome. I've been accused of having a severe case of TDS. He tweeted on the day that I left CNN, and I accused him of having Acosta derangement syndrome. But anyway, he came after me that day. But anyway, I'm less concerned about Trump derangement syndrome than I am about Trump depression syndrome. That we get so down in the dumps, that we get so defeated, that we get so depressed, that we just give up. And if he can be beaten at the ballot box, as he was in 2020, his cause can get beaten at the ballot box in 2026 and at 2028. And you have to hold on to hope. A lot of people think that, well, Jim, we just know who you are because of Donald Trump. Maybe so. But I also covered Barack Obama. And I tell people all the time, I was out there on the campaign trail in 2008. And I remember going to those gymnasiums and those stadiums and seeing those huge crowds of people. And I would say, my colleagues and I would start to say, there's something going on here. This is a big deal. And some of the smart people in Washington, the know-it-alls, they were, oh no, this is Hillary Clinton's election. She's going to win this one. She's got this in the bag. Don't worry. This Barack Obama guy, he's got a future, but not like Hillary Clinton. She's going to win. And I just remember thinking to myself, look at the message that he's talking about out there. He's talking about hope. He's talking about change. And what I tell people all the time, not only here when I speak to groups here in the US, but all around the world, don't count out the United States of America. Do not count out your fellow Americans. We have the capacity to surprise. You just can't tell what's around the corner. The next big thing could be right around the corner. So you can't give up. You can't give into, and I talked about this when I left that day. I said sayonara to 18 years. Mike, as Mike likes to say, the best way to get separated from your job in legacy media is to tell the truth. But on that day that I left, I said, don't give in to the lies. Don't give in to fear. Hold on to truth and to hope. And I know that might sound a little corny to the younger folks in here, but it's true. You can't do it. You can't give in. You have to hang on. And I'm telling you, when people ask me, how are we going to get through this? I tell them this, we're just going to outlast them. We're just going to outlast them. We're just going to get through it. And we're going to do it together. And that means you got to help pick up your neighbor over here and take him down to No Kings on Saturday. Don't stay at home. If you do stay at home, make sure you watch it on our YouTube channels. We would appreciate that. As a matter of fact, if you're going to go to the march, put it on the YouTube channel so we get the number.
Yeah.
And hit a like or something and subscribe, and then go down to the march. Do that if you could. Do so peacefully, not be provoked, because one of the things that they're trying to do right now is they're trying to provoke these crowds. I have a strong suspicion that on Saturday, they're going to try to provoke the crowds. Donald Trump likes to talk about plants on January 6th. I wonder how many plants will be out there on No Kings Day. I wonder about that. I'm not saying that it's going to happen. Don't want to get in conspiracy theories, sound like Tucker Carlson or something, but I wonder about that. Don't get provoked. Remember the example set by people like Martin Luther King and Gandhi. Peaceful, nonviolent protesting. That is the way. You have to have faith that we're going to get through this, and in this country and in this place that Thomas Jefferson helped build. It can last, but it's going to take all of us. And thank you everybody for coming tonight. Really appreciate it. Thanks for all your questions. Thanks to Mike. Mike Fanone, ladies and gentlemen, Mike Fanone. Whoop. Thanks a lot.